Hello, today our class is on data collection. Meaning and significance we'll discuss. Collection of data implies a systematic and meaningful assembling of information for the accomplishment of the objectives of a statistical investigation. It refers to the purpose of gathering of information relevant to the subject matter of the study from the units under investigation. According to Crum, Patton, and Thibault, collection of data means the assembling for the purpose of a particular investigation of entirely new data, presumably not already available in published sources. This definition confines the term collection to the primary sources of data. However, in a broader sense, the term is generally applied to both primary and secondary sources of data. Collection of data also refers to the methods using in getting the required information from the units under investigation. Collection of data is the most important stage in the process of statistical investigation. The final results of the investigation are ultimately based on the data collected from various sources. Any lapse, negligence, or bias on the part of the investigation makes the final result faulty and worthless. Therefore, collection of data must be done carefully and properly. Uh, Next, we will discuss sources of data. What are the sources of data? Okay, the data for the purpose of statistical investigation may be collected from primary and secondary sources. Here, a source may be referred to a person or an organization having the data or the reports and publications in which the data is published. A primary source may be understood as any organization, person, or publication which neither gathers the data hitherto nor collected elsewhere through first an investigation. In the words of Newswanger, primary source is a publication in which the data are published by the authority which has gathered and analyzed them. A secondary source means a source which gives the information that has already been gathered, analyzed, and presented by other agencies for their own purpose. Data generated from a primary source is called primary data, and data collected from a secondary source may be referred to as secondary data. In other words, data originally collected in the process of investigation is known as primary data, and that collected by other persons is called secondary data. Now, we will discuss the differences between primary and secondary data. Okay, it is difficult to clearly draw a line demarcation between primary and secondary data because the difference between them is only relative. Professor Horace Sechrist rightly point out that the distinction between primary and secondary data is largely of degree. Data which are secondary in the hands of one party may be primary in the hands of another. To illustrate this by an example, if the Open University collects the details of students appearing for BCom degree examination through direct enumeration, it is regarded as the primary data for the university. If the government or other agencies take such information from the records of the Open University, it becomes secondary data. Though the difference between primary and secondary data is relative in nature, the following points may be help to spot the difference. We will discuss those points. But primary, first we will primary data. The data is collected from its original source, whereas in secondary case, the data which is already collected from the original source is made use for the purpose of statistical investigation. Primary data, the data is original in its form, okay, and second, the data is refined in its form. Okay, first, the purpose which is used maybe in the second time they may make some changes, that means they may refine the secondary data. The definition of the statistical units in primary data can be made use of to suit the objective of the investigation. The definition of units already used in collection of secondary data has to be adopted for the purpose of statistical investigation. Whereas in primary data, a new plan of investigation and execution has to be carefully prepared for the purpose of collection. Whereas in case of secondary data source, no fresh plan of investigation is required since the data is already collected for some other purpose and it is being used for uh, purpose in hand, and they can make changes in the secondary data according to their requirements. And we have advantages of primary data. What are we will discuss? What are the advantages that are having primary data? The primary data gives more reliable and accurate and adequate information which is suitable to the object and purpose of investigation. Okay, and the primary data has the advantages of avoiding the errors arising from the copying of figures from the book, as in the case of secondary data. While collecting the primary data, the definitions for various terms are given to suit the objective of investigation. Hence, the data collected may be utilized completely and meaningfully for the purpose of investigation. Okay. Then, advantages of secondary data. It is convenient to gather secondary data since it is already collected and analyzed. Okay, and collection of data on certain aspects like cropping pattern, characteristics of population, etc., though primary sources is not feasible for individual or private organizations due to time and money constraints. For such information, only secondary data has to be used. Collection of secondary data is economical in terms of time, money, and efforts. Okay, next, limitations of primary data. Collection of data from a primary source needs detailed planning and execution, which is a time consuming process. Collection of primary data requires field investigators who are efficient, trained, intelligent, sincere, and tactful. Selection of such investigators involves many difficulties, including a heavy financial burden on the collecting agency. And the next one limitation is the reliability of primary data depends upon the honesty, sincerity, and integrity of the investigator on the one hand, and the degree of cooperation given by the respondents on the other hand. Often the primary data give misleading information due to lack of integrity of investigators and non-cooperation of respondents in giving answers to certain delicate questions. And the limitations of secondary data will discuss. Since the data has been collected for a specific purpose, it may not suit the requirements of the present statistical investigation. And next one is the degree of accuracy aimed at time of collection of data may be different from the degree of accuracy for the present investigation. That means as time passes, the purpose of data collected may lose its importance. Third one is secondary data may not be reliable since the agency collecting the data may be possibly let in some biased or unbiased errors. Okay, they may resort to some sort of biased and unbiased errors that may uh, give faulty conclusions when we use the data as secondary data. And another limitation that we have for secondary data is various terms and references used in the secondary data may not always be useful in the present investigation. Okay, next we have uh, choice between primary and secondary data. That means which data we need to use. Choice. We have a choice to select primary or secondary depending upon different uh, factors. After considering the relative merits and limitations of primary and secondary data, the investigator faces the task of choosing the appropriate data. Primary data is generally used where the secondary data available does not suit the purpose and analysis. Nowadays, there is increasing trend towards using secondary data because it is available in different areas of research. However, the use of primary and secondary data are not mutually exclusive. Okay, in most of the investigations, these two sources of data are used as complementary to each other. Selection of a particular source of data or determining the proper blend of the source depends upon the following factors. First, we will discuss nature and object and scope of investigation. Nature, objective, and scope of investigation will influence which we need to select. The choice between primary and secondary data largely depends upon the nature of investigation. Okay, if the nature of investigation requires collection of information from each unit by census method, primary source of data should be selected. Generally, this will be done by the governments because of huge expenditure. Okay, the object and scope of investigation also influences the source because the source selected must be suitable, adequate, and appropriate to the predetermined purpose of investigation. If the scope of investigation covers a wider area, then restrictions must be placed on the primary data. Next one is availability of finances. Availability of finances is an important factor which influences the selection of the sources of data. That means the resources which are available to the company, okay, let it go for primary data. Choose the data. That is, collection of primary data requires large amount of money. Okay, for planning, preparation, and forms, training of investigators, and organizing the programs, time and money consuming process is primary data. Okay, hence we need to go through these items. As the secondary data is readily available, it does not involve much expenditure, therefore secondary data is preferred. If the financial resources are meager, okay, we'll prefer secondary data. Where finances are in abundance, nothing is abundant in this world, but I am using this word, okay, relatively. Okay, where finances are in abundance, primary data is generally preferred for its reliability, accuracy. Okay, we will, of course, nothing is abundant in this world, only for the sake of expression we use. And reliability, if we want to have reliability and accuracy, certainly we need to go with primary data. Another is availability of time. Okay, not only money, time is also precious. Okay, time is also precious. We need to consider the time that is available to select the source of data. Time is the most crucial factor in all statistical investigations. The sources of data has to be selected by keeping in view the time available at the disposal of the investigator to complete the investigation and the time required to collect the data. Okay, often in certain statistical investigations, time elapses before the final results are processed and presented. For example, if a company wants to know the demand for air coolers in summer, the data has to be collected from respondents all over country. But by the time data is collected from primary source, the season may change and the purpose of investigation may not be served. Okay, therefore selection of primary source has to be done. Okay, keeping in view of the time available in the disposal of the investigator. Where time is not adequate, secondary data may be used. As we have considered here an example, that is seasonal data is required. Okay, if the primary data we select, that will take a lot of time and the season will change. Okay, then the collected data will become futile. Okay, next, degree of accuracy desired. The extent of precision required in the data will determine the use of primary data or secondary data. Although the utmost degree of accuracy may not be practicable in statistics, the data must provide a reasonable degree of accuracy. Due to various limitations, secondary data cannot exactly provide high degree of accuracy required for a particular investigation. Primary data, if systematically collected, provides more accurate information. Thus, in statistical investigations, if systematically collected, provides more accurate information. Thus, in statistical investigations, where a higher degree of accuracy is expected, the primary source of data can serve the purpose. Next, agency collecting the data. Okay. The collecting agency has considerable influence on the choice of the source. If the government body collects the data, it can naturally afford to bear the heavy costs and can go in for the primary data. Where an individual or private organization conducts the investigation, and if the data is to be collected from a wider geographical area, secondary sources are normally relied upon because of the limited finances and time available for them. However, if the data to be collected is confined to a small area and sample, primary sources may be used for such investigations. No source of data will, however, serve the entire objective of investigation. While collecting the data, a balance has to be maintained in deploying a particular source considering its limitations. Okay, its limitations. Next, methods of collecting primary data. Okay, and there are 5 methods we have to consider here in collecting the primary data. Okay, that is direct personal interviews. In direct personal interview method, the data has to be collected by the investigator through personal contact with the respondents. This method is particularly useful in collecting information regarding various qualitative and behavioral aspects. The investigators can personally observe the reactions of the respondents and assess their attitudes. This method ensures correct and reliable information if the investigator does not exercise any bias. In addition, for the success of this method, the investigator must possess the following qualities. We will consider some qualities. Okay, the investigator must be skillful in extracting the reliable data from the respondents. Sometimes the data relating to personal matters may not be revealed directly and easily. In such case, the investigator must use his intelligence and skill to place the respondents in good humor and collect the relevant information. Next is respondents, when cross-examined or flattered, may depart from the actual data. Okay. Under such circumstances, the investigator should be tactful in getting the correct and actual data. In the absence of tactfulness, he may tend to collect irrelevant information. Okay. Next, we have the investigator should not have rigid belief regarding religion, caste, color, sex, etc. The investigator should be polite, okay, courteous, and must be capable of adjusting himself to the temperament of the respondents. He must also acquaint himself with the conditions prevailing in the area of the respondents. The investigator should not possess bias or predetermined notions. They will affect the collection of accurate data. Direct personal interview method has the following advantages. Okay. This method helps the investigator to collect original, accurate, relevant, and adequate information because of the face-to-face interaction with the respondents. Okay, we could able to assess whether he is telling truth or not by face-to-face interaction by observing his facial expressions. Okay, next, respondents are likely to be affected by the personal nature of the questions and therefore have a tendency to supply biased information. The interview method enables the investigators to check this inaccuracy because he can skillfully and intelligently and explain the object of the investigation and get correct information. Under this method, the investigator can adopt the language suited to the respondents in order to get relevant data. Okay. This method ensures flexibility. The investigator can make necessary adjustments in the process of collection of data in order to get desired information. Okay, this has also some limitations. Okay, we will discuss. This method is suitable only if the scope of investigation is limited. A wider scope of investigation restricts the use of this method as it is time consuming and costly. The use of interview method is limited by a personal bias of investigator. In this regard, Professor W.I. King says this type of inquiry, while admirable because of additional accuracy due to personal supervision, must not cover too narrow a field to representative and is also liable to be too large an injection of the personal element. The prejudices and desires of the investigators become too often unconsciously woven into the fabric of his conclusions. If the investigators are not adequately trained before the collection of data, and if they do not possess the necessary qualities like skill, intelligence, honesty, courage, and diplomacy, they may fail to collect the relevant data in the face-to-face situations. Okay, this method is suitable to investigation covering limited scope of area, be and investigations which are supported by huge resources of money, time, and personnel. Okay, next, indirect oral interviews. Okay. Statistical data is collected with the help of indirect oral interviews when the nature of data involves complexity and the respondents are relevant and willing to provide the information directly. Under this method, the investigator conducts interviews with the several third-party informants who are supposed to have the knowledge about the problem under investigation. This method can be successfully used under the following conditions. The respondents approached indirectly must have full knowledge about the matter of investigation. The investigator must possess the necessary talent, intelligence, skill, honesty, and courage in eliciting the required response. The respondent should not be influenced by the tactics used by the investigator to get biased information. Okay, this method has advantages. They are collection of data in face-to-face personal contact situation will help the investigator to collect the relevant, adequate, accurate information. This method will cover a wide geographical area and involves less time and money for the investigation. Necessary expert opinion can be collected to carry out the investigation more effectively and correctly. This method suffers from a few drawbacks. There are the data collected through this method is indirect in nature and hence the accuracy of the data depends upon the personal qualities of the investigator and the respondent. It is possible to inject the personal bias of the respondents and investigator into the data since no direct supervision is made. This method of collecting the data is relevant and suitable where the original source of getting the data is not available, and B, when the nature of data such that the investigator cannot ensure adequate data if the respondents are contacted directly. And third one is information from correspondents. Okay, in this method, persons known as correspondents or local agents are appointed at different places to collect data. These correspondents gather information regularly and send the same to their office for further processing and analysis. Correspondents are normally paid on a fixed salary basis. This method has the following advantages. Collection of data is economical and covers a wide area. The data is collected at regular intervals and ensures continuity. This method has a few drawbacks. Personal bias of correspondence may affect the accuracy and adequacy of the data. Correspondents may neglect to report the data. Uniformity in the collection may not be possible due to the adoption of different methods of collection of data by different correspondents. Okay. This method can be suitably adopted in cases where regular flow of information is required and B, where high degree of accuracy is not needed. Okay, and rough estimates are sufficient for the purpose of inquiry. And fourth one is questionnaires. Okay, collection of data through questionnaires is an important and popular method. Under this method, the data collected with the help of a particular form containing a number of questions which are designed to collect the necessary data relating to the object of investigation. The form is called questionnaire. Thus, a questionnaire is a printed form containing a list of important and pertinent questions relating to a problem. The questionnaires are sent through the post to the respondents with a request to fill them up and return them to the investigator. If necessary, the respondents are to be assured that the data collected from them will be kept confidential. Okay. The questionnaire method has few advantages. This method is useful for covering a wider geographical area. This method is relatively economical as the data can be collected with minimum use of resources such as money, time, personnel. In the words of Razik, this method possesses the apparent advantage that a very large field of inquiry may be covered at relatively low cost. It enables the investigator to collect original data from the respondents, and data can be collected on continuous basis. It avoids personal bias of the investigator since the questionnaires are filled by the respondents themselves. Data collected through questionnaire methods ensures more accuracy due to its large coverage. However, this method has certain drawbacks. There, questionnaires can be administered to only educated people. Therefore, its coverage is restricted to the literate group in the population, where, like India, it is somewhat a big drawback. Most of the informants may not respond in filling up the questionnaires mailed to them. Many persons may not return the questionnaires after its completion. Sometimes they may give vague, incomplete, unintelligible data which may not serve the purpose of investigation. Sometimes the respondents may give inaccurate information. There is no scope to check these inaccuracies personally in this method as the investigators has no personal contact with respondents. This method lacks flexibility When the questionnaires are posted, the investigator loses control over the respondents. There is no possibility of asking supplementary questions, eliciting the required information for the unanswered or partially answered questions, as in the case of personal interview method. Questionnaire method is suitable to the government agencies which can statutorily compel the respondents to provide the data, to obtain the primary data, to enlarge background or a problem, or for varying the accuracies of secondary data. When the respondents are well educated and know the value of information supplied for the purpose of investigation, this method is not suitable when the data required is complex and confidential in nature. Lastly, we have schedules. Collecting the data through schedules is considered complementary to the questionnaire method. Under this method, a group of investigators, also known as enumerators, are asked to collect the data through schedules. A schedule is a form containing specific questions relating to the problem under investigation. The schedules are personally served on the respondents and their answers are recorded by the enumerators. Schedule method has advantages. They are, if it ensures reliability and accuracy of data, as the investigator can have personal contact with the respondents. This method can be conveniently applied to collect data from uneducated persons. The personal bias of investigator may not have much influence on the data, as the enumerator has to confine himself to the questions designed in the schedule. The rate of non-response can be minimized, as the enumerators can clarify the doubts and convince the respondents to give the information. Of course, apart from all these advantages, there are a few limitations. They are: direct approach to the respondents is a time consuming process. Okay, schedule method is very expensive since it requires selection and training of investigators. This method can be successful if the investigators are skilled, well trained and intelligent. Okay, after formation of Telangana government has made a survey by using schedules. Okay, and it has manpower like teachers, lecturers to do this survey. Right. Schedule method is suitable, particularly in collecting data from illiterate masses and when there are vast resources at the disposal of the investigator. This is one good example for government. This method is considered to be more practicable and is widely accepted because of high rate of response due to personal interaction of the investigator. Okay, and then we have a few differences, okay, between questionnaire and schedule. Okay, we'll go through those differences. Though marked differences do not exist between questionnaire and schedule, a few are mentioned here. Questionnaire administered through post, schedule administered personally by investigator. Whereas questionnaire answers are recorded by respondents, in case of schedule, answers are recorded by investigator, that is called as enumerators, we call them as. Questionnaire is an indirect method of collecting information, whereas schedule is a direct method of collecting information. Okay, the questionnaire, using the questionnaire collecting information is very low cost, whereas the cost of collecting information by using the schedule is very high when compared with questionnaire. Okay, questionnaire is suitable where a wider geographical area is not to be covered. Okay, wider geographical area to be covered. It is suitable if a limited geographical, where schedule is suitable for a limited geographical area is to be covered. And questionnaire, it can be applied to educated respondents only, whereas schedule can be applied to both educated and uneducated respondents. Okay, next we have some precautions which we need to take when we use a questionnaire or schedule, okay, in order to get the high response from the respondents. One is the questionnaire must be carefully designed and printed flawlessly. Okay, proper selection, training, supervision of personnel or investigators, and test checking of questionnaires schedules ensures collection of accurate, adequate, and reliable data. Okay, and next, respondents must be offered some incentives such as supplying free copy of the results of investigation, free gifts, concession, coupons, etc. As far as possible, the sample size must be attached to ensure the return of the questionnaire. Prepaid postage and envelope must be attached to ensure the return of the questionnaire. If necessary, follow-up letter or personal visits must be made to reduce the rate of the non-responses. Okay. Next, construction of questionnaire or schedule. Questionnaires or schedules occupy an important place in the collection of primary data. Since the success of collection of relevant, adequate, accurate data depends upon the careful and cautious preparation of the questionnaire or a schedule. While designing the questionnaire or schedule, the investigator may face certain problems. Okay, Arthur Kornhauser has classified the problems in drafting a questionnaire. Okay, there are decisions regarding the question content, decisions regarding question wording, okay, decisions regarding the form of response to the question, decisions about the place of the question in sequence. Generally, we will see this type of problems where sometimes if you are not well versed in a language, okay, which we are going to frame the questionnaire or schedule may lead to ambiguity or non-responsiveness. Hence, in framing the questionnaire, we must take the help of people who are well versed in that uh, language. Okay, uh, of course, some essential general principles can be followed in designing the questionnaire or schedule is given here. Then first one is the number of questions in a questionnaire must be as far as possible, be minimum, and at the same time they must fully cover the objective and purpose of the investigation. Answering a lengthy questionnaire may be viewed as time consuming, boring, and a tedious exercise. Okay, questions should be prepared in simple, clear, and straight terms so that the meaning may be understood in its proper perspective. A clear and straight question, which is easily understood by the respondents, may help in getting relevant and accurate data. Okay, when the technical terms are used in the questionnaire, they must be clearly defined so that respondents get clear meaning of the term. As far as possible, questions should be courteous and non-offending. And next is proper wording and placement of questions would help to understand them clearly and unmistakable by the respondents. This ensures validity of the answers. Okay, and next the questionnaire should be designed in such a way, such a manner that the questions fall into a logical sequence. This will enable the respondent to understand its purpose and also improves the quality of his answer. As far as possible, identical group of questions should be arranged at one place. This will facilitate the tabulation and leave no chance for omission or duplication. Okay, next. Answers to the questions should not call for lengthy explanations or calculations. As far as possible, simple and multiple choice. Okay, questions are uh, multiple choice questions may be framed by suggesting possible answers, and the respondents may be requested to choose one among the alternatives The question may have either two alternatives. Answer yes or no. We call them as dichotomous. Okay, more than two options are there, we call it as multiple alternative answers. Otherwise, if there are only two, yes or no, male or female, if such kind of examples are given, they are called dichotomous. Okay. Next, when the answer cannot be indicated in alternatives, open questions may be framed. For these questions, the answers will be open and respondents are free to give any lengthy answer. Here no restrictions are imposed on the respondents. They are free to express themselves in their own language. When specific information is required, the question must be simple and direct. They should be asked only when the respondents are capable of giving correct answers. Personal questions which affect the pride and sentiment of people should be avoided, should not be given, should not be asked. Necessary instructions for filling up questionnaire must be given to guide the respondents. The investigator must enclose a covering letter which should mention the following aspects: what is name, address, other details of the investigator, objectives and scope of inquiry, definition of various terms, and an assurance that information will be kept confidential. People don't want to uh, disclose their names. That means they want to have an anonymity. Okay, certain corroborative or cross questions may be asked to check the correctness or consistency of answers. Okay, while designing the questionnaire, method of tabulation and processing should also be kept in mind. Okay, which tabulation method we are going to use. Okay, how we are going to process the data that we got through the questionnaire should be kept in mind while designing the questionnaire. Before administering the questionnaire to the target respondents, it is necessary to carry out a pilot study. This helps the investigator to find out the drawbacks of the questionnaire and to correct them. The pilot study also helps in getting an idea about the extent of non-response and securing greater cooperation by redesigning the questionnaire. Pre-testing requires skill, caution, and care, otherwise, the design of the questionnaire may be affected. For good results, proper testing, revising, and retesting are desirable. Methods of collecting primary data. All the methods of collecting primary data have certain disadvantages and limitations. There are advantages and disadvantages. Okay, that means disadvantages are nothing but limitations. No single method may be suitable to any type of investigation. Okay, therefore, while choosing a particular method of collecting data, the factors like the objective and scope of investigations, nature of investigation, availability of resources, degree of accuracy, etc., are to be carefully considered. Though these factors guide the selection of appropriate method, personal qualities like skill, experience, and common sense of investigator will help to a greater extent in collecting the data. As Professor A.L. Bole has rightly pointed out, in collection, common sense is the chief requisite and experience the chief teacher. Okay, next, collection of secondary data. Okay, due to the constraint of money and time, collection of primary data may not be possible under all the circumstances. Therefore, we as the investigator has to depend upon secondary sources. For collecting secondary data, no specific method or technique are prescribed except that it is collected from a source. The source of secondary data may be broadly classified into two categories. Okay, namely published sources and unpublished sources. Okay, and we will discuss what are the published and unpublished sources. Well, first of all, we'll discuss published sources or published sources. Statistical data collected by different organizations or agencies is mostly in published form, that is printed form. In statistical investigations of a general and non-confidential nature, The results are usually published and kept for the use of public. Such published information may become secondary data to those who use them for their inventions. Published source of secondary data may be obtained from following. One is government publications. Okay, the government and its official organs collect and publish statistical data pertaining to various fields. These publications are known as official publications. Okay, next one is publications of semi-government organizations. Certain organizations enjoying government patronage conduct statistical investigation, and the results of such investigation are published in the form of reports. Such reports are known as publications of semi-government organizations. For example, certain organizations like the Statistical Department of Reserve Bank of India, the Institution Economic, okay, the Institute of Economic Growth, okay, and the Institute of Foreign Trade, municipal corporations, various district boards, etc., publish their reports which provide basic data for in-depth studies of in their fields. Right. Next, publications of research institutions. Various research institutions publish reports on the projects undertaken by them. They may also publish data in research journals which constitute an important source. Indian Statistical Institute, Institute of Applied Manpower Research, various universities, etc., are some of the examples of research institutes bringing out publication. Okay, next, other institutional sources. Various public and private, commercial and financial institutions such as Institute of Chartered Accountants of India, stock exchanges, cooperative societies, state financial corporation, bank, etc. also publish reports on aspects related to their activities. And newspapers, we call them as freelancers, or periodicals. A variety of newspapers and periodicals also report data concerning various fields. The Economic Times, the Financial Express, Commerce, Capital, Lok Udyog, etc. are some of the examples of periodicals and journals that report statistical data relating to socio-economic, trade and financial aspects. And reports of the last one of published sources is reports of international institutions. Certain international organizations publish statistical data relating to various global aspects of economics, trade, finance, etc. etc. Such institutions and publications include ILO, International Labour Organization, IMF, International Monetary Fund, WHO, World Health Organization, UNO Statistical Yearbook, UN Demographic Yearbook, etc. Unpublished sources. Okay, all the statistical data collected may not be available, okay, in published form, but it can be used secondary data. Okay, such sources constitute the internal records of private organization, results of research carried out by individual researchers, etc. The investigator has to visit their office and take down such information from document records. Okay, now we'll discuss precautions in using secondary data. Okay, while using secondary data, greater care must be exercised since already collected data may not be suitable to the present study because of inadequate sample size, errors in definition of units, errors of substitution, arithmetical errors, etc. Therefore, secondary data should not be accepted as its face value. While using such data, the investigator must thoroughly scrutinize and satisfy himself regarding its reliability, okay, adequacy and suitability. The following precautions are necessary for using secondary data. One is the investigator must carefully examine whether the secondary data is suited to the objective and scope of present investigation. Okay, next, the reliability of the data must be examined by the investigator. Reliability means the extent to which the data can be substituted in the present investigation. Reliability of the data can be tested with reference to the collecting agency, type of inquiry, methods of collection, definition of units, etc. And lastly, the secondary data collected must be adequate and its coverage must suit their objective and scope of inquiry. If the data is inadequate, the conclusions drawn on the basis of such data may be faulty and worthless. Okay, thank you. With this, I conclude my class. Thank you.